With Mark, there's no talking about going to the top of the temple or change these stones into bread. That comes later. No. It's very quick, because he's then straight on to with the wild beasts.
Tempted is a Greek word, perazzo, which means to make a trial of or to test for the purpose of ascertaining the quantity or how something thinks or behaves. I think that this whole wild beast things, and even the way that Mark has encapsulated this, could be a foreshadowing of what Christians will later on face. You have the adversary, Satan, read Caesar.
Right.
You have the arena. Well, how about wild beasts in the arena? You have trials of testing. Well, that's the temptation. And so it's almost like Jesus and Mark are foreshadowing what's going to likely be happening with his followers. In fact, Tacitus records in some detail how Christians suffered during this time. He says, mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. And Nero offered his gardens for the spectacle and was exhibiting a show in the circus, while he mingled with the people in the dress of a charioteer or stood aloft on a cart. There's almost like a foreshadowing of what could happen to Jesus' followers here. As always, in the crushing, the fragrance of the church is released. And so I do suspect that the wild beasts may be alluding to that. And obviously the angelic ministering, that's nothing that I would expect less than, to be honest.
You got me thinking, because you brought it, you didn't say remes, a hint. If I'm that Roman slave and I'm listening to this will give me a different understanding. So here I am in Rome, and he was there in the wilderness 40 days. 40 days. You know, you get 40 lashes for punishment. Tempted by Satan, and of course the Roman concept will be slightly different, but there'll be things out there trying to test you. Was the wild beasts? Well, I'm in Rome. I know all about the Colosseum, or the Flavian Amphitheatre.
That's right.
And the angels ministered unto him. This would slightly have a different meaning from a noob coming in who's a Roman slave. And I hadn't picked that up before. That's quite interesting.
You'd be able to grasp the concepts, and you'd be able to grasp the broad meaning of it. So I think that while you may not understand the Jewishness of it, you would still grasp it conceptually.
Yeah. Absolutely, because obviously I would be living in a Greco-Roman world in which the personification of the gods in human form is very real. Olympus or wherever Jupiter is. This would not be too difficult to grasp. What would be underlying it is a slightly different message, which, as the gospel carries on, starts to get weeded out.
It sets a foundation that you can stand on and start to build on, right? Because it's not so strange to you that you can't contextualize it, picture it in your own mind's eye, grasp some of the principles that we're talking about here without being wedded to the Jewish belief system.
Yes.
But you get the richness of it when you understand the Jewishness of it.
In verse 14, it doesn't give a date because obviously the Roman consular dating system was different to what became known as AD, the Christian calendar. But it's saying now after that John was put in prison. That would have been an event that somebody would have been well aware of, even potentially in Rome. If you are going to listen to the gospel, the good news about Christ, potentially you would know John. We've already heard about him in the gospel. But it can be dated. potentially, can't it?
I mean, what would you put that down to?
Well, the date, this would be around about 28, won't it, AD? It's 18 months, so 29, late 28, early 29 AD, which I don't know who the two Roman consuls were. Hang on, you got me going now.
We know it was a time of Herod.
Yeah, that's right. Although he's not mentioned here, so I think it was Appius Junius Silanus and Publius Silius Nerva. Now, that would mean nothing to anybody apart from if you lived in Rome. Question, would people have known the date?
They'd have had a rough idea who this guy was.
28 to 29 AD. It's in Matthew 14, Mark 6, Luke 9:9. And it was the behest of Herodias, his brother's wife. So, yeah, about 28. We don't quite know. And of course, it's made slightly more convoluted because this would have been the old style reckoning. It changed in the 17th century when it went to from Julian to Gregorian.
So you're looking at anywhere up to around, 2930 AD?
Yeah.
Which ties in with the 3 years of ministry that Jesus had. He started at the age of 30. So he was 30 years old, roughly, when he started this ministry. So that would have been when he was baptized, went through the mikveh. He preached, as we understand, for about 3 years, and then he was executed. And we suspect that he was executed around about 33 AD. That would sort of dovetail pretty much nicely with that.
Amazing short period for how it affected world history.
2,000 years on, we're having a discussion about him, right? That's quite incredible. This man from this backwater called Nazareth in Galilee, 2,000 years on, is still worth talking about. The information that he conveys in his life, his teaching, his death and his resurrection is quite staggeringly outrageous. It really is. One of the things about this verse 14 that John's put into prison. So John is the forerunner. He's the one who's preparing the way. Well, you have to remove the one who's preparing the way in order to make way for the one that's to come. And so by placing him in prison, he's actually no longer on the scene. John the Baptizer has done his part. He's done his preparation. And then Jesus, once John is in prison, it says Jesus came into Galilee. So it was only when John was out of the way, off the highway, that Jesus steps onto the highway to come and start his ministry and to kick off. And he does that in Galilee, and he preaches this gospel of the kingdom of God. So kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God are pretty much synonymous terms. Yeah, Malakut Shamayim, Malakut Shaddai, kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God. But there is a question in this particular gospel, whether it's the kingdom of God or just the gospel of God. We have it as the preaching the gospel of the kingdom of God, but within the Greek there is a question mark as to whether it is the gospel of the kingdom of God or it is just the gospel of God. Because the gospel of God doesn't appear anywhere else in the scriptures.
Is that a different source, do you think?
Yeah, I think it comes from one of the earlier manuscripts has the gospel of God, which is really interesting. And again, I don't think it detracts. I think it actually adds some really interesting angles. So you have the gospel of the kingdom, which is predominantly found in Matthew. You have the kingdom of God, which is used well over 50 times in the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke. But depending on how you read this gospel of God, it could be the gospel of God, it could be the gospel which God brings, or it could be the gospel about God. So when you look at all of that, you see an interplay between the concepts that are being presented. You could actually read this as the gospel God brings is the gospel about himself. Whichever way you cut it, it just gives you more to wrestle with and gives you more interesting stuff to play around with, which brings us really into verse 15. I think we've given it some thought.
Ray, finally, we did something well.
I think we, give it some thought. There's lots of things to toy around. And again, with all of this stuff, the beauty is to dive into it. Don't be frightened of it. Dive into it. Play with it. Let the text speak. Unpack it. Unlock it. Cross-reference it. you're not gonna hurt it.
Yeah. You can never get to the end of God, and like I said last time, hopefully we'll soon get to the beginning.
Yeah, you never know.
Take care, mate.
Take care, fella. Bye.